This is not about technique. This is about history. This is about the history of the potters who were patriots in the American Revolution. And when I bumped into it in my research, I was totally fascinated about it. And that's why I'm going to be sharing it with you. I will be throwing on the wheel, and I'm going to throw representative pieces from the potteries in that area. So I will be doing a little bit of technique. I'm going to try to stay on subject, but like I said, I'm not going to definitely talk about where clay pits were located or do the whole history of that. That's my Massachusetts Potters program. So I'm going to be covering the regions of Charlestown over to Dorchester, down to Taunton, into Danvers, down into Norwich, Connecticut, and up into Bennington, Vermont, as far as the range of potters go. I'm actually even going to be covering just a small period of time from April 18th, 1775 to basically October 1776, talking about several potters that were involved in the American Revolution. I don't mind questions, but I am familiar enough with what questions are asked that I try to weave them in. Yeah.
How did you get started in this? Tell us about yourself a little bit.
Well, it was 10th grade in Tantasca Regional High School that I fell in love with it. No, actually, I didn't fall in love with it. I was clumsy at it in 10th grade. I fell in love with it in 11th grade. In 12th grade, I committed myself to being a potter. Had the opportunity, because I lived in Sturbridge, to work at Old Sturbridge Village. I, at that point, connected history to making pots on the wheel. Got frustrated when I was there because I was reading in the big ceramics magazines of the time that if you want to learn about old pottery, you go to China or you go to France or you go to some other country, whereas the American Indians have been making pottery in the areas for 12,000 years, and there's just a lot of history that happened, and I started finding opportunities to learn more about it. And then things started tying in together. And I've been at it since then as a full-time potter, one way or another.
Very cool.
So that's the way it's come across to me, and I've been fortunate about it. Been very good fortune for me. The connection with what I do on the wheel and the connection with what I'm going to be talking about is pressure and movement. So anytime you watch me shaping clay on the potter's wheel, it's pressure and motion. That's all it is. It looks magical. I'm proud to show it to you because I make it look very easy. That's my aim. But hopefully if you ever do try it, you never get frustrated with it thinking you're supposed to be doing like me. We were talking about clays before. I'm using a clay I'm mixing and up myself. And it's a clay that is largely made from clays out of state. There's no supplier except for one right now. I could dig clay. Warren, where I live, Warren, Mass, is a site where it's a brickyard town. West Brookfield was a brickyard town. East Brookfield was the potter's town. So if you're looking for smooth clay, it would be in East Brookfield. But that's a different story.
Is that called a pug?
This is called a chum.
Chum.
Some folks call it a pug today. Again, I'm going to try to stay on topic, but since you brought it up, I would have apprentices, and my apprentices would be bringing me clay. This is my chum. My apprentice is also called a chum. It's a potter's term. So if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. If you can't see what I'm doing on the wheel, please move. You can sit right there. Just move a chair, plop yourself down there. I make this look very easy. If you get on the potter's wheel, do not compare yourself with me. I've been at it for, my wife does not want me to tell you 48 years because it makes me sound old. So I refrain from saying that. But I've been at it and I make it look very easy. So we're doing the history thing. The history of patriots who were potters in New England. And we're going to start off in 1770. One of the curious things, too, about what I'll be talking about is the fact that most of the potters are associated with a museum nowadays. So you're going to be learning about that too. The connections are really quite unique. So 1770, and the British set down what's called the Townshend Act. They won't allow you to import tea into this country. So it's called also the tea embargo. Nobody's buying tea in Massachusetts. Or Massachusetts Bay Colony. They're all upset about that. So there's a brick maker in Danvers, Mass, which is a clay pit, which is a potter's town too. Danvers encompasses Peabody, and first it was Salem, then it was Danvers, Salem, and then it was Salem, Danvers, Peabody, and then it was South Danvers, then Peabody. So what happens is Jeremiah Page gets upset. Let's see, I just want to make sure I got this right. So he gets upset because his wife is drinking tea in the house, which is now the Danvers Historical Society. Jeremiah Page is a brickmaker. He's boycotting tea. Comes home, finds his wife drinking tea, goes up to her and says, "No tea will be drunk in this house." To which she and her friends replied, "Upon this house, but not within it." She took her friends, she took her tea, she took her teapot, and she went to the roof and drank the tea. So that's the first early rebellion of a potter or a brickmaker, because I'm going to relate the two trades, into making this first pot. Now, as far as Massachusetts potters go, maybe we were making teapots. They're very rare for that time period. There we go. I just pulled a handle. That's called a strap handle. And as I mentioned earlier, everything here has to do with pressure and motion. There you are. And so that's how I'll be shaping it. I'm pinching the clay, which will cause it to stretch upwards. My fingers are fat, so I have to substitute with a stick. My inside finger. Clay moves. This is how the technique is shaped. Pressure and motion. There we go. Decoration on this would have been done with a lathe. This is a wheel. Potter's lathes were found in the mid-18th century, so what they were doing was turning the pots horizontally, or the components horizontally, onto a lathe head in England, and using what's called an indexed head, cutting into the clay or decorating with white clay slip or colored slips onto the surface of the pot. So I'm cutting using just a steak knife right now. Most of my tools are not potter's tools. There, so we do that, we do that. We got the ribs on it. The example I'm using is, there we go, that goes like that.
That's the spout.
That will be the spout. Again, this is a British teapot.
So cool.
There we go. I do also have a teapot program, which is on the history of teapots, which is also on the stoppage cable. So we're going to go this way, we're going to go this way, we're going to bring it in. Pressure and motion, same as the way the potters worked, same as the way the brickmakers worked. So I'm pinching in rings. That goes like that.
Like magic.
That's why I'm happy to show this to you. There we go. And that's... And I'm going to straighten this up one more time. This goes in like that. This goes in like that. Now, by right, I would be making two pieces as the potter, but because of time and because I'm trying to explore a number of different processes with you, I'm going to combine a technique. This is not the way it would be made historically, but I just want you to see also what can be done with the potter's wheel. A chocolate curling tool. It's not a potter's tool. It's nice for cleaning up the pots. And let's see, now we scrape off the wet clay. And we go back to what's called engine turning. So by right, this would have been mounted on a horizontally on a lathe.
What would keep it from sagging?
Oh, the stiffness of the clay brought to a point where if I were doing this at home, I would demand that it wouldn't be as soft as this, which is very gelatin-like. I would want it to stiffen up so it's flexible like a piece of American cheese. We call it cheese hard. I can also allow it to progress to a point where it's flexible like thick leather sole material. So we call it cheese hard or leather hard. And it'd probably be close to leather hard where it could be that the hollow part slipped over, not into a chuck, but over a form. That would retain it. There's, again on YouTube, Don Carpentier, historic Eastfield Village, demonstrates this technique quite well, horizontally, as well as decorating the pots. But I'll be doing it here, because this would be done with an indexed head. An indexed head simply means that there are different diameter wheels on the head that have notches cut in them. And it moves a bed that the tool would be resting on, just like the way my hand is moving. So I would be able to cut into the clay with an even approach. So it wouldn't be as random as I'm doing it. There we go. So let's see, we do that, we do that, we do that. Oop, lift it up too soon. Now we do this. Now this is the part that I would have made these pieces individually in England and then treated them to work this way, but this is different here. Because I want to show you that you can also take one piece, do two pieces.
Wow.
So I can
Very
make
cool.
the lid that way. So we'll put the spout like that. And cut it off like that. And then attach the handle here, like that.
It's so cool.
There. There we go. So, what's going to happen now is the wife is going to come down from the roof. 3 years will take place at 1773. Bunch of guys go to Boston Harbor and throw a whole bunch of tea off into Boston Harbor. That's going to result in a couple things. It's going to result in April 19th, 1775, the Paul Revere's Ride. So even though Jeremiah Page was a brickmaker, and he lived in Danvers, he also became a colonel for the Danvers Alarm Company. So when Paul Revere took his ride in Charlestown, Colonel Jeremiah Page took the men out of Danvers and brought them up to Monotony, which is another story I'll be telling you. But first, we're going to talk about another guy named Paul Revere and Bunker Hill. Charlestown was a massive clay pit. Had brickyards all over the place. Had potters all over the place. We had a trade going with the clay, going all the way up to Nova Scotia and down to the Caribbean. We made a lot of sugar molds. Those cone-shaped sugars that you see, we made the molds for them, and we shipped them out of port. There was one potter that I studied, and that was Grace Parker and her husband Isaac Parker in the early 1700s, and they made a lot of these sugar molds that were shipped out. And they were purchased also by a guy named John Larkin. John Larkin was married to a Kettle. Her name was Kettle, Ruth Kettle. The Kettles are all potters in Charlestown at the time. They came in the 17th century, early 1635 in the Abigail. The first Kettle came over. So she was from a potter's family, and her brother-in-law Joseph Larkin was also a potter. So there's a ton of pottery connections because there's a ton of clay.
Were there a lot of women potters?
Answer your question, no.
I wouldn't-
No.
I didn't-
Not in the time, no.
Yeah.
Working in the trade, it's abbreviated. You find a couple here and there, but really, no. No. And the reason for that, possibly have to do more with apprenticeship because you had to live with the potter starting at the age of 10 to 13 to the age of 21. So it wasn't really a place for it to be found a woman. But they were working in the trade in glazing and stuff like that. So anyway, you got John Larkin, and he is selling his wares, selling the Charlestown wares up and down from Nova Scotia to the Caribbean. He's friends with Paul Revere. He sees the lanterns going up in the North Church. He takes his father's horse, and after Revere goes across Boston Harbor, is given the horse by John Larkin, his father's horse. And Revere will ride off through the brickyards, which actually the clay was coming out of Breed's Bunker Hill. It's all clay. So what you have is you got, I'm going to do this one next. You got Revere being chased by a couple British troops. Revere knows where the clay pits are. They don't. He gets their horses stuck in the clay, throws the British soldiers into the pits, and Revere makes his escape. That was through the clay pits. This here is going to be a piece that was found at the at an archaeological dig that was done in Charlestown, I think in the last 20 years or so. Could have been done in the big dig. It's a very rare piece, but the style is very unique. So it could have been something that Revere saw, as well as Larkin. The area in Charlestown with the brickmakers and potters probably amounted to hundreds of men, to be honest with you,
That worked in the potters?
working the pottery in the brickyards. By the way, Revere lost the horse to the British when they captured him later on. There we go. And the horse was never returned to the father. There we go. So we do this, we do this. So this is a different way of making a cover now. So we got the lid going. That goes like this. So, concerning Revere's ride now, what we had was the ride in April 18th and 19th from Boston. The call was made to several communities, about 7 communities, I believe. When the British fought those in Charlestown, cannon fire was laid upon the brick kilns, and there are remarks made in diaries of the battle being fought behind the kilns. The soldiers built what's called a redoubt, earthen walls. Those earthen walls most certainly would have been built with the clay digging tools for the potters and the brick makers. There we go. And this one's got an interesting technique to it for decoration. But first I'm going to put the handles on. There we go. That goes like that. That goes like that.
Like a little bean?
Well, it's a funny little shape. They called it a sugar. And the way this was decorated in Charlestown, because the Charlestown potters were competing against the Philadelphia potters, they wanted it to look like Philadelphia, although this looks very Dutch, is using just a piece of leather and doing arches like that. So you can see again, nothing has to be a fancy tool when you make pottery. You just have to be creative. That goes like that. And then, put in the bag. Have me a nice head on this screw. They probably used a dowel. So that is the Charlestown pot. And that's the Larkin Paul Revere connection and the pottery connection in Charlestown. Now, we go back, Jeremiah Page calls up the potters, does the Danvers alarm. April 19th, 1775, Page calls up the men leave Danvers. They end up in Arlington, which previously was called Monotony. And in Monotony, 8 of the Danvers men were ambushed by the British at what's called the Jason Russell House. And at the Jason Russell House still stands today. And 8 men died, mostly potters. One was a brickmaker, Nathan Putnam. Don't know his age. The youngest to die was 19 years old. The others were in their mid-20s, and the oldest was 33 years old. Pull another handle. Danvers had a lot of potters, which the trade continued right into the 20th century in the town of Peabody. It's a huge clay pit. We were talking about clay pits before. Their clay there goes 170 feet thick.
Wow.
And they went down over 100 feet. There was a brickyard there. They went down over 100 feet. They went from freshwater clay to saltwater clay, which meant the whole world was covered with salt water and deposited. And the shells that were in that saltwater clay screwed things up for the brickyards, because what happens is the lime burns out of the shells, and then the lime swells up in the brick. After you build with them, they soak up the moisture from a humid day, and the bricks fall apart. So it wasn't a good endeavor.
Did the Native Americans,
Yeah, it's a different program, but yes, they did make pottery.
did they?
Yeah, it goes back 8,000 to 12,000 years in New England. I should mention that the potter's wheel was introduced in Charlestown in 1635 by Philip Drinker, who also brought over kettle on the Abigail. the Spanish had already been making pottery down in Paris Island in the Carolinas since 1570. So we're 50 years, 60 years later making pottery in New England. The Spanish had a big stronghold on it down there in the Spanish colony. And certainly Mexico. That's where Mexico gets its heritage from. Okay. The Danvers men traveled the farthest distance. The Danvers men also, some of them were Quakers too. And one that was killed, Southwick, it seems like he could have been a Danvers Quaker. But we'll be talking more about Danvers Quakers later in another form. But this is a Southwick pot. This has been identified as a pitcher made by Southwick. Not necessarily George, but the Southwicks are a huge pottery family throughout Massachusetts into New York State, as a matter of fact. So this easily could have been a pitcher or a jug that was made for a home or for a tavern, but many of the potters, like I said, made other things as well for the sugar trade, for the iron trade. Some potters worked with Revere making bells. Those potters were called bell founders.
Okay, that's an electric wheel.
Yeah,
So in early American times, would they have like a foot pedal to turn the wheel?
two ways. In the period we're looking at, we have two types of wheels. I can have this wheel head attached to a heavy disc at the bottom that I propel with my feet,
Yeah.
and that causes the momentum of it allows me to shape the clay on the wheel head on top. But we also developed around the same, just in the 1750s, a type of wheel where we put a bend in the shaft. And off the bend, which is would be a wooden arm that swings back and forth, just like what you see at Old Sturbridge Village. And you stand at the wheel, or a old Singer sewing machine. Instead of going up and down that way, it's sideways like this. And if I wanted to, I could take my chum and move, which is the kid, my apprentice, move the treadle arm to the front of the wheel and have the kid row for me. So I could work that way. And I'd be shaping clay all day long. So those are the two types of wheels, but they will evolve also later on.
He's just looking at a picture.
There we go. That goes like that. So this is a Southwick pitcher or jug. They were known for their black glaze. There we go. So it goes like that.
In order to fire it, you're gonna dry it a couple of weeks and then.
Well, if I popped it outside on the black tar right now, we're talking 2 hours. And I could do it with bowls. I could dry bowls in that time. I would not want to do flat items like plates because there's only one surface drying unless I put it on a rack. So you got to pay attention to it. But I could feasibly have thrown this morning, and being careful, certainly have it dry by tomorrow. It's not even this evening if I did it this morning at 9. Yeah. I just have to play with the sun. And that's too much work because I got to be on the wheel. So I'd put it aside and I'd wait till I get another 500 pots made and then I'd fire. So it just sits on the shelf. It doesn't have to fire. So technically, what he's asking is when does it become pottery? It becomes pottery in the kiln. I don't make pottery on the wheel. All I do is throw. I shape clay. It's got to be heated in the kiln. Pottery is a type of glass, in a sense. It's opaque. This is a 1770s chamber pot, 1730s chamber pot, and baking pot, and a brick from a kiln that was in Charlestown in the 1730s, 1740s. Clay melts. It doesn't harden in the kiln. So this one over here was actually turning to lava at this point. It went way up to like 1900 degrees. So it's blackened up. It's not a black glaze. It's because the clay's turning black on me at this point for other reasons. So the clay is going to dry, pots are going to sit. Whenever you have enough to load the kiln, several hundred, thousand, some stacked inside of one another, then you can fire the kiln, and the kiln can take anywhere from it can take any amount of time because you're always firing for the heaviest pot and you're firing for the widest pot, technically. The kiln at Old Sturbridge Village takes 24 hours or so to heat up, with a preheat the day before, and took another 24 to 36 hours to cool. Pottery kilns have thin things when you're firing with bricks. In a brick kiln, 1 million bricks in Taunton, Mass. Took 4 months to heat, 6 months to cool. The pots contain a moisture which never burns off. Never evaporates from the clay because it is chemically bound. It is like the silica when you purchase a camera or some electronics, you get those silica packets. Clay's always thirsty. So even though the clay that makes this, the water that makes this soft evaporates and the pots get hard, there's still that secondary water. And when they're in the kiln, we go through what's called a water smoking stage up until 350 degrees. When that water smoking ends, then we progress on to a point where the inside of the kiln starts to glow red. A dull red is around 800 degrees. We're going to get the pots up till they're glowing orange. Because of the fact in the time the lead glaze on the pots would be happy whether it was a red orange or a bright orange, we could go from a range of about 200 degrees, maybe somewhere to 200, 250, 1700 to 1900. Maybe with bricks, we can go higher. But my stuff starts to slump when it starts to go into yellow heat. And yellow heat's around 2100 degrees. So when the pots are starting to glow inside, I will remove a sample of a piece of pottery, which is just a ring coated with glaze, and I see if it's matured. Hopefully that's how smooth the firing went, because up until that point I could hear pots exploding. And when pots explode, the whole load falls over. And you start hearing all these things, and it's 800 degrees, 1,000 degrees, and you know you're not going to jump back in there and unload it. The stoneware pot, which is the blue decoration there on the table, is a clay that can take a higher temperature. That goes to yellow heat. The practice of potters in this country when they made stoneware was to take, similar to this red clay, what's called a slip glaze, and put it on the inside of the stoneware pot to make it a brown shiny glaze. So I'm taking this clay, melting it so hot that it's making a brown glaze on the inside of the pot. But that pot retains its shape because it can take a higher temperature. So that's yellow heat, and then there's white heat, which is porcelain, which is, some consider it pure clays. They're really not, technically, but they can be brought to a white translucency in the kiln. And the inside of the kiln's glowing at 2300 degrees, and it's white heat. It's big difference there. These pots were brought to easily bright yellow in the kiln. Now, they're probably next to the firebox, and that's why they screwed up like this. June 17th, 1775 was the burning of Charlestown. They leveled it. The potters and brickmakers that were there in Charlestown prior to that were being starved out to some degree as well. But when the burning happened, we all scattered. The industry died. Potters left the brick. So you're talking, I figure at least 400 individuals plus left the trades that they were working in the clays. It was a tragic situation. June 17th was also the Battle of Bunker Hill, which I referred to. And it wasn't until March 19th, 1776, that Washington ended his protection around Boston, what's called the Siege of Boston. George Washington's going to go down, and he's going to visit a man named Leffingwell. Leffingwell is a merchant. And he is very much involved with producing trades. So he's running some pottery shops, but I'm not sure if he's a potter himself. He's running a pottery shop on Bean Hill. So it's April 1776. He goes down and he sees, he's there, and George Washington goes and visits him. They got some plans to make concerning fighting the British in New York State. Leffingwell's potters make some pots that are very different than what we're familiar with up here in Massachusetts. I don't know if it's the Dutch heritage or what. These are old pots. This is called a pipkin that I'm making right now. The Leffingwell house still stands today in Norwich, Connecticut, as the Leffingwell Museum. At this point in time, he was 42 years old when Washington approached him. Washington was on his way to Long Island at the time. There we go. For a battle that was to take place later that year, called the Battle of Long Island or the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. Leffingwell was asked, I'm not sure at that time or later, to prepare 2 boats. That we don't know. For the soldiers on Long Island.
To build them?
To actually obtain them is the wording that I read.
Obtain.
Yep. That looks good. A little bit more. So this is a cook pot to be next to the fireplace, not a table pot. There we go. That goes like that.
Norwich.
This is Norwich. All right, so now what's going to happen is something pretty weird. Because this little piece here gets rounded off like this. Has these little feet put on like this. That goes like that. Then it goes like that. And then I'm going to cut this, I'm going to cut that down just a little bit. And that goes like this. So you see me put strap handles on things. This is a tubed handle. Oh, goes like that.
That's a handle?
That's a handle. So you supposedly
Oh, to-
put a stick in so you can remove it from the fire.
I see.
It's called a pipkin.
Huh.
There we go. Now it's squatting down. I'm losing the little legs down there, but you get the idea. It's a little too soft right now. So it could be placed above coals so it doesn't get cracked on the bottom from the direct heat. So Leffingwell met with Washington. That leads us to John Norton. Now when you go to Old Sturbridge Village, you go to the Hervey Brooks pottery shop. Hervey Brooks had a cousin. It's this John Norton, even though they never met. Their birth date's several years off. But it's possible they learned from the same family, to be honest with you. The Buells. Now I mentioned Kettle before coming from Charlestown. Kettle also went to Litchfield, Connecticut. The family of Kettle went to Litchfield, and they were the first potters into Litchfield County in the 1700s. And they taught a couple guys who taught John Norton of Bennington pottery fame, which is another museum up in Vermont. And Kettle Norton actually married one of the Kettles, one of the Buells. He married one of the Buells. The Kettles taught the Buells taught John Norton. He became a redware potter, just like his cousin Hervey Brooks. They dug red clay out of the Litchfield Mountains, Litchfield Hills, I should say. And then he got the ambition to move up to Vermont, to Williamstown, made pots there, and then he moved to Bennington, Vermont. But before all that rest of his life happened, he found himself in the battle of Long Island. And that battle was in August of 1776. It took place from August 27th to 29th. It was a fierce battle, a lot of men died. But most importantly, Washington needed to evacuate these soldiers, and did so with the help of Leffingwell, the other potter from Norwich, with his 2 boats that he took aside. Hundreds of soldiers were taken off the island, and from Brooklyn Heights. Now this is a rolled rim jar, which means it doesn't have a cover. This is a John Norton jar made up in Vermont. It's got a rolled rim on it, which suggests that you're going to be tying a cloth instead of putting a cover on it. This jar, he decorated as well with slip, which a lot of other potters did too, but the way he did it was with a brush. And believe me, he wasn't really that good. That's basically it. There are a few pieces that have this fascinating decoration on it. The pottery shop up in Bennington got a lot better than that. Like I said, there's a museum up there now honoring them. And as a side shoot, there's another museum in Sturbridge honoring his cousin Hervey Brooks. So that's the Norton piece. And now we get to the one story down in Swansea and Somerset. There were several areas that were called Pottersville. One's up in New Hampshire. Another one's West Sterling, Mass. Somerset was another Pottersville. And there's actually a clay town out in the Berkshires too. It literally was a town, but everybody moved away and it doesn't exist anymore. It's part of Montgomery now. There we go. So let's do this one. But what's going to happen with these boys down in Somerset is that they're Quakers, which means they don't believe in fighting. They're from Danvers, South Danvers. They're part of a long legacy of potters. 3 different families, all married into one another. They start the trade, although the trade started earlier down in Somerset, or Pottersville section, which still exists today. They were shipping pots by boat. They had a boat called the Warren. And what happened with them was the British stole it. Just like the way Paul Revere's horse was taken from him. They stole it. They broke all the pots on the ship. And after using the boat, they left it where the families found it. Because they were objectors to the war, they petitioned England for reimbursement from the British Crown, because apparently they were still loyalists as well. And by the time the petition was to be approved, one of these potters decided that he would fight in the war. And he stopped being a loyalist, and they never got reimbursed for the broken pottery. There we go. So we got that going. All right, let's do that. Let's cut a different groove here. There we go. That goes like that. And then and this shape here, even though it is from Somerset, is very much also part of Danvers history too. For some reason, these guys left town and they just stay with the same form.
How many items a day would they be making, Rick?
Potter's good for 1,000 pounds of clay a day if he's got helpers. So this is roughly a 4-pounder, 3-pounder. So I should be making somewhere around 300 of these. But I would have that chum of mine running the pots away from me and another chum bringing me clay at the same time. There. That's supposedly what you're supposed to do. Now, Hervey Brooks at Old Sturbridge Village, when he did his last load of wares at the age of 89, he made 120 milk pans in that one day, which represents, at about 12 pounds apiece, considerable amount of weight that he finished up with.
Yeah.
He died at 94. This goes here. That goes there. So this has a spout on it here. That goes like that. It is a chopstick. That's what I used to make the spout on the teapot. Chopstick or a poo-poo platter stick. So, as a big overview, the uses of clay in the time were very widespread. So, as I mentioned, we were making the bells. We were hired to make bells. We were called bell founders, which is supposedly another name for potter in one dictionary I looked at. We were making crucibles at the Sawgus Iron Works and all the other iron works for melting iron. William Seaver developed another type of crucible down in Taunton. And other potters were making things out of clay for many different types of trades, not just for the household use. We were making them for the sugar trade, making sugar molds, as well as the drainage pots. And these go up to molds that hold up to 45 pounds of sugar to make into a sugar cone. When it came to making something that resembled a style, you do recognize in different areas some consistency. But then that consistency in a glaze color, in a form, like I said, this originally could have been Danvers. You find it up in Amesbury, and then you could also find it down in Somerset. This was a popular shape. Mm-hmm. Down in Somerset, they were making a green glaze, which we weren't doing elsewhere. I don't know why. I don't know why they got set on it. Some historians claim it's so they could get a hold on competing with the British goods for tableware. I don't know if that's true. I really don't know if that's true. When a potter left Charlestown, and after the burning of Charlestown, and went to Watertown or Brimfield or Holland, he brought what he knew. So if I go to the Brimfield flea market and I find a piece that looks remarkably Charlestown-like, like this piece here, it's hard to say. But everybody's going to say that's Charlestown. Could be John Hines in Holland. When the Clarks moved up into New Hampshire and started making pottery up there, they developed a few things copying English pottery that were very unique. But some of their pieces are just simple flasks and bottles and jugs. And they had apprentices and they had family that moved on, and so the repetition is
Some of the Bennington, Norton crocks were
yeah.
very, with the big ones.
We made pots big enough to stand in back in after the Civil War, down in Somerset, at the Sign-In Pottery. They were so big you could stand in them. They were made for the jeweler's trade.
Why would a jeweler want a pot that big?
That's all I know, is that they were making them for the jeweler's trade. And the potter hated it so much that his granddaughter, who was alive at the time back in the early 90s, she confirmed the story I read. He brought his potter's wheel out into the yard and took an axe to it. Oddly enough, someone who kept visiting them was Lizzie Borden. And she'd come and watch.
Whoops.
So I don't know. There's an influence there. Thoreau used clay, for instance. And he used a kiln too. He patented pencils. It's graphite from Sturbridge mixed with clay. The amount of clay affects the hardness of the graphite. And that was Sturbridge clay. It's a Tantasco mine. So clay is all over the place as far as the trades go.